By Sri Lanka's best internet package for online learning and online working with many amazing offers. Call 1212 for more information. Sri Lanka Telecom.
ලෙන්ගතුකම වැඩි කරගන්න ලව්ජු රුපියල් 50ට අඩු කළා.
මාමේ එන්න අපිට එකක් බොමු.
Tonight, kick it out. The epidemiology chief concedes that COVID-19 could mutate in Sri Lanka as well and lays out the best course of action.
The virus we are identifying can mutate in future. We have to control and we should eliminate this disease.
Remembering the fallen, victims of the 2004 tsunami remembered. Coming up on First at 9, this Saturday the 26th of December 2020.
Nava sunlight sakura. Then Dikukal Pavatina Sakura Mal Suandin.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9. I'm Dhamike Kanai. Let's start with the local stories. Now, the best way to address the COVID-19 pandemic is to adopt the clear objective of eliminating it from the country, as the virus strand found in the island too has the potential to mutate, posing a far greater danger. The chief epidemiologist at the epidemiology unit, Dr. Sudat Samaravira, said this today, with concerns being high following a new variant of the virus being found from the United Kingdom. Dr. Samaravira noted that the Ministry of Health, along with all other stakeholders, have taken the necessary steps to prevent the UK virus strand from entering Sri Lanka. Meanwhile, another COVID-19 death was confirmed not that long ago this evening, taking the country's tally to 187.
Sri Lanka's COVID-19 death toll was reported at 186 yesterday after one person succumbed to the virus. The victim was a 54-year-old man whose cause of death, according to the Department of Government Information, was an acute heart infection that was brought on by the COVID-19 virus. Meanwhile, a total of 593 persons tested positive for the coronavirus today. The number of infections confirmed yesterday, however, was 551. From yesterday's case tally, 541 were attributed to the Palyagoda COVID-19 cluster, while the remaining 10 were identified as prison inmates. The district that accounted for the most of yesterday's infections was the Colombo district, with 300 cases. The Gampa and the Kalutara districts reported a considerably low number of coronavirus cases yesterday, as they confirmed 52 and 37 fresh infections respectively. In addition to this, 28 cases were confirmed from Nuwara, 27 from Ratnapura, 17 from Ampara, 16 from Kandy, while 12 infections were recorded from Trincomalee. 11 other districts meanwhile confirmed the remaining 49 coronavirus infections.
Since the beginning of the pandemic in December last year, this virus has evolved or it has mutated. It is changing its genetic composition. It will be happening throughout. It's the nature of the virus. The most important change that has been reported in the United Kingdom is that the virus has been changed to a different genetic composition and making it 70% more transmissible. So because of that, it has a very big impact. So it can spread very rapidly. It may cause that many people will need intensive care units and also many people will end up with deaths more than what we are experiencing now. So because of that, it is necessary to prevent. By all means, it is introducing into our country. This can be introduced through a person who is coming from one of these countries where this disease is being reported. So because of that, what we have to do is that when people are arriving from abroad, they should be handled very carefully. They should be quarantined and do the necessary testing properly. And also other people who are providing services, including the healthcare services and other people, all the people should take extra precaution in order to not to get the disease or transmit this disease. The Ministry of Health along with other stakeholders has taken every effort to contain this disease or to prevent introducing this new variant into our country. But this virus will be a mutation that we can't stop. It will be mutating throughout. Even the virus that we are identifying within our country now can mutate in future and can give a different genetic variation. So because of that, in order to prevent prevent such catastrophic changes in the virus, what we have to do is we have to control the disease within the country as soon as possible, and we should eliminate this disease from our country. It is a good thing to observe that majority of people in our country are adhering to the infection prevention and although these health regulations that we are advocating. But if one or two people are misbehaving, what will happen is that is adequate to generate new clusters and to spread disease to many districts or throughout the country. So because of that, at this moment, the cooperation from all sectors of the people in the country is very much essential to control this disease.
The chief epidemiologist at the epidemiology unit, Dr. Sudat Samaravira, added that despite yesterday being a holiday, all laboratories across the island were functioning around the clock.
Yesterday alone, we have done that in our laboratories throughout the island, 13,516 samples, and this is in addition to the rapid antigen testing that is being done everywhere. Even it is been a holiday yesterday, our laboratories were working round the clock and has issued this number of reports yesterday. So that is our country that it is without considering whether it is a holiday or not, that is working towards the control of this disease.
Safeguard hand sanitizer. නවතම නිෂ්පාදන පෙළ නිරෝගිමත් දිවියකට.
Now, 16 years ago on this day, Sri Lanka faced its most devastating natural disaster on record when a mega tsunami struck the eastern and southern coasts, killing around 35,000 people in the process. The tragedy struck at a time when the island was still battling the brutalities of the terror group LTTE. The country observed a 2-minute silence this morning in remembrance of those who perished during the colossal catastrophe. This is a look back at what happened in commemoration of those brothers and sisters we lost.
On the 26th of December in 2004, another day with mass Christmas celebrations across the island, little did Sri Lankans know that the day will be etched in their memory for the most horrifying of reasons. That morning, a powerful undersea earthquake with a magnitude of 9.1 to 9.3 in the Richter scale struck off the coast of Sumatra Island, triggering a tsunami. The waves that were generated as a result of this struck over 10 countries in the Indian Ocean, including Sri Lanka, recording the deadliest ever tsunami the world had ever seen. Until then, tsunami was just another word for many Sri Lankans. A series of waves ranging from 15 to 30 feet that were generated from the earthquake, which occurred miles away from the island, invaded the east coast at around 9:25 am. After a few minutes, another series of mega waves struck the southern coast, causing massive devastation and loss to lives of people who were caught unawares. This tsunami claimed the lives of around 35,000 Sri Lankans. The total number of deaths from all the countries the waves engulfed that day is a staggering 230,000. What's more, the phenomenon also left a large number of people homeless and caused mass destruction to man-made structures. 16 years on since the tragedy, Sri Lankans got together once again this morning to commemorate their loved ones who were forever lost during the horrific natural disaster. People observed a 2-minute silence island-wide in memory of the fallen. The world, however, was to be given another dubious gift on that day in the form of the worst single rail disaster, sending the area of Paralia into record books. The train that left Colombo that morning with a load of passengers was overturned in Paralia by the gigantic tsunami waves that struck the coastline, claiming the lives of 1,270 people. The area has since become a beacon of tourists and mourners alike, and today, a commemoration service was worked off at the Paralia Tsunami Memorial to rekindle the memory of those 1,270 people who never reached their destination. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa too commemorated the victims of the tsunami at his official residence this morning. There were also several other commemoration events worked off in several areas of the island, in remembrance of the thousands of Sri Lankans claimed by the sea on the 26th of December in 2004.
Moving on with the other local stories, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa engaged in religious observances at the temple of the sacred tooth relic in Kandy and called on the chief prelates and the deputy chief prelates of the Askiri and Malwata chapters.
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa called at the sacred temple of the tooth relic in Kandy last evening and engaged in religious observances. The head of state then called at the Malwata temple and had an audience with the chief prelate of the Malwata chapter, Most Venerable Tibbatuwave Sri Siddhartha Sumangala Thera. The President also called on Deputy Chief Prelates of the chapter, Most Venerable Dimul Kumure Vimala Dhamma Thera and Most Venerable Niyangoda Vijita Siri Thera. President Gotabaya then called on Chief Prelate of the Askiriya chapter, Most Venerable Varakagoda Sri Jnana Ratana Thera at the Askiriya temple. He also called on Deputy Chief Prelate of the chapter, Most Venerable Anamaduwe Dhamma Dasi Thera and the Registrar, Most Venerable Medagama Dhammananda Thera. The head of state also visited the Askiriya Dadige temple, called on the Deputy Chief Prelate of the Askiriya chapter, Most Venerable Veneruwe Upali Thera. The President also visited the Askiriya Mahapirivena and called on Deputy Registrar of the Askiriya chapter, Most Venerable Narampanave Ananda Thera. In the meantime, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa visited the Jai Shri Mahabodhi in Anuradhapura this morning and called on the chief incumbent of Aramastana, Venerable Dr. Pallegama Sirinivasa Thera. The President also had a friendly discussion with the public present at the premises. The head of state then visited the Ruwanveli Saya and engaged in religious observances. He also called at its chief incumbent, Venerable Pallegama Hemaratana Thera. Then the head of state called on the chief incumbent of Mirasavatiya temple, Venerable Itala Vatunu Vave Jnana Tilaka Thera.
Opposition leader Sajith Premadasa says that he is following through on the promises he made during the presidential election by coming to the people to resolve their issues, though he is now in fact the opposition leader. He made these comments while discussing public issues prevailing in the village of Kandasurindugama in Kataragama.
Opposition leader Sajith Premadasa visited the village of Kandasurindugama in Kataragama yesterday and held discussions on public issues.
ජනාධිපතිවරණයේදී මම කිව්වා මම රටේ ජනාධිපති බවට පත් කරොත් මම ජනතාවගේ කකුල් දෙක ළඟට අවිල්ලා ප්‍රශ්න විසඳනවායි කියලා. 69 ලක්ෂයක් කිව්වා නෑ ජනතාව ළඟට එන්න අවශ්‍ය නැහැ කියලා. ඊට අමතරව උසුළු විසුළු කරා. පහර පිට පහර ගැහුවා. මම පුදුම වුණා. මම හොඳ ආකාරව දන්නවා දැන් 69 ලක්ෂයම දැන් ප්‍රාර්ථනා කරනවා කකුල් දෙක ළඟට අවිල්ලා ප්‍රශ්න විසඳන නායකයෙක් හිටියනම් බොහෝම හොඳයි කියලා. රටේ ජනාධිපතිවරයා හැටියට මට කරන්නට රටේ ජනතාව එපයි කියපු දේ මම විපක්ෂ නායකවරයා හැටියට කරනවා. මම ආඩම්බර වෙනවා මමම ලියාගත්තා සියලුම ප්‍රශ්න මේක මේ ලියන කොටත් මේව ඔළුවට යනවා. ලිව්ව විතරක් නෙවෙයි පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේ ඉදිරිපත් කරලා මට තමුන්නාන්සලාට විසඳුම් ලබා දෙන්නට පුළුවන් උපරිම ප්‍රමාණයට මම කැප වෙනවා කියලා මම මේ අවස්ථාවේ සතුටින් කියන්න කැමතියි.
We will see you once more on the other side of this break. Stay with us.
Ceylon Bank, the bank with a heart.
Welcome back. You're watching First at 9. Now, the foundation of open economy is the rule of law, and Sri Lanka has not improved in that area to present day. Head of the Department of Economics of the University of Colombo, Professor Sirimal Aberatne, expressed this sentiment when he and two other panelists, head of academic program at the Advocate Institute, Dr. Sarath Rajapathiran, and Executive Director of Verite Research, Dr. Nishan Dimel, joined in the Viriamuatta to discuss the topic of economic freedom of Sri Lanka during our current affairs program at Hyde Park on AdaDerana 24.
In your view, where does Sri Lanka stand? How concerning is the question of economic freedom of Sri Lanka? Not just the current context, but policies that we have adopted for decades.
1977, we had one second developing country in the world to undertake the economic reforms, widespread economic reforms. But you know, we could not complete it. It didn't go far enough in my judgment. That is that we did very well on trade, we did very well on running the macroeconomics at the beginning, but it faltered as we proceeded. And one of the reasons why we did not hold on to the reform program, because there were other things interfering. For example, we started Mahavali. Mahavali took a lot of attention of the government and also had a very huge demand on the government of expenditure. So while we are trying to improve the tradable sector, that is exports and imports, import substitution, Mahavali intervened in this sense that the government had to spend a lot of money, and particularly these expenditures on the economy were more on non-tradable goods, so it appreciated the exchange rate. So on the one hand, we were promoting the export sector, the tradable sector. On the other hand, we were doing something that to an extent negated what we were trying to do. Later it came to be called the Dutch disease. That is when one project or one export does very well, it sets the exchange rate for others, and it was not very beneficial to us. Second thing is that I included myself, that we didn't look beyond the trade very much. We didn't change the institutions very much. We left the public enterprises as they were, and public enterprises have been a headache all the time to us. And so we actually didn't continue with that thing. There were changes in the government. It's ideologically, one party was not for freedom, for economic freedom, other parties were for it. And so there was no consensus how to proceed. Being a democracy, our governments must change, and it did change. So the enthusiasm that one government had did not carry to the next stage.
You did speak of the 5 areas, what we may have done well and what we may not have. I'd also like you to touch on that as we speak.
Number one, government, where we have done quite okay, better, but that is actually the size of the government, and why we have done better there, not because we are better off in terms of managing government expenditure and taxes. Of course, our tax system, if we look at our direct marginal taxes, income taxes, the ratios are quite lower compared to many other countries. That is one positive area that we have. But other than that, the government revenue is quite low, about 12-13% of GDP, so that the government is restricted by that for spending on private consumption and private investment. So that is why when we dig deeper into that area, it is not a positive achievement actually, it reflects the inefficiency of our taxation system. Number 2, legal system. This is the area out of those 5 areas where Sri Lanka has the poorest score in economic freedom, legal system, the rule of law. Throughout our history, starting from 1977 policy reform, I must say that market economy, the foundation of the open economy, is actually the rule of law. When you don't have that foundation, you are building a house without the foundation and it is shaky. So that's what has happened to Sri Lanka, and this is also an area where we haven't improved that much up to today. Third, that is the money, and this is another area which is actually the central bank's policy. This is also quite fairly okay because it measures the inflation and money supply and all these monetary policy measures, and they are quite okay. So this is the only area where Sri Lanka has scored the highest score. And then international trade, freedom for trade internationally, and that means exporting and importing. In this area, although we established our trade liberalization policies in 1977, during the last 10 years so we have actually moved backward. This is the area, another critical area that Sri Lanka has been on reverse direction. And that is very critical, and even we can confirm those things by looking at our trade performance. And then next area would be regulation of business environment, regulation of the labor market, and regulation of the financial. So in this particular area, if you look at those areas, actually we haven't done quite well in those areas because we haven't touched actually some of these areas. And our administrative system, our lengthy bureaucratic procedures, and our labor regulatory systems, and the lack of mandatory costs for dismissal of labor. So in all these areas, Sri Lanka scores quite low. So Sri Lanka is not a good performer in terms of our economic freedom in the country, and that's why it is quite consistent with our economic performance also. If you have the higher economic freedom, your income is higher, your growth rates are higher, your export performance are higher, your human development is higher, your corruption is lower, poverty is lower. So all these things are nicely connected to the level of economic freedom, and we can see those things by looking at the other countries. So that in that sense, Sri Lanka has a long way to improve our status.
I think in more recent times we've been talking about Budget 2021 and the decisions that government has taken with regard to taxation and the taxation policy. But do you not think that the government has ensured economic freedom with the current tax regime, or are there any challenges that you foresee?
The problem with the tax reduction and the way we are handling it is we are thinking that reducing taxes can somehow make the economy better, and that it is it is by itself a sign of more freedom. But if that takes away money that the government can use to protect the vulnerable, to protect the poor, to uplift social services, then actually we are generating unfreedom. So there's a tension. Obviously, we don't want government to tax everything you earn, but neither do we want government to actually create unfreedom for the vulnerable. Right, and so you have to figure out how you solve that problem in a reasonable, equitable way.
Now, a UK think tank expects China to overtake the United States to become the world's largest or biggest economy by 2028. If it does happen, it would be 5 years earlier than previously estimated. The contrasting recoveries of the two countries from the COVID-19 pandemic has been highlighted as the reason for the rapid growth of China.
In an annual report published today, the Center for Economics and Business Research said that for some time, an overreaching theme of global economics has been the economic and soft power struggle between the United States and China. And the COVID-19 pandemic and corresponding economic fallout have certainly tipped this rivalry in China's favor. It added that China's skillful management of the pandemic, with its strict early lockdown and hits to long-term growth in the West, meant China's relative economic performance had improved. China looks set for average economic growth of 5.7% a year from 2021 to 2025, before slowing to 4.5% a year from 2026 to 2030. While the United States was likely to have a strong post-pandemic rebound in 2021, its growth would slow to 1.9% a year between 2022 and 2024, and then to 1.6% after that. Japan would remain the world's third biggest economy in dollar terms until the early 2030s, when it would be overtaken by India, pushing Germany down from 4th to 5th. The United Kingdom, currently the 5th biggest economy by the CEBR's measure, would slip to the 6th place from 2024. However, despite a hit in 2021 from its exit from the European Union's single market, British GDP in dollars was forecast to be 23% higher than France's by 2035. Helped by Britain's lead in the increasingly important digital economy. The CEBR said Europe accounted for 19% of the output in the top 10 global economies in 2020, but that will fall to 12% by 2035 or lower, or if there's an acrimonious split between the EU and Britain. It also said the pandemic's impact on the global economy was likely to show up in higher inflation, not slower growth. The Center for Economics and Business Research says that it sees an economic cycle with rising interest rates in the mid-2020s posing a challenge for governments, which have borrowed massively to fund the response to COVID-19 crisis.
Welcome back. This is First at 9. Now, a British scholar insists that the Western countries have failed in the fight against COVID-19, largely due to the incompetence of their governments and their ignorance about the world. Martin Jacques, a visiting professor at Tsinghua University, criticised Western countries' response to COVID-19 and praised the efforts of East Asian countries. He said that Western nations vacillated between life and the economy when making priorities in face of the pandemic, and it left everything in a muddle.
The reality is that the West, had time to prepare for this. It didn't start in the West until at least 2 months after it started in China. No serious preparations were made, and we've never been able to get on top of the situation. And the reason we haven't been able to get on top of the situation is we've never really been clear what the objective is. Whereas, for example, not just in China but in East Asian countries, there was a clear objective, and that was to eliminate the virus. I don't think that has ever been true in the West. Basically in the West, we've yo-yoed between different priorities. Is the priority life, or is it the economy? Is the priority individual liberty, or is it effective government intervention? And the result is that it's been a mess and a muddle, and that is the problem. And so there's no real strategy. We're always behind the game. We're always trying to catch up, and we're of course consistently failing. You need a society and a culture which recognizes the importance of individual responsibility, that we are part of a society, that social discipline and social responsibility is fundamental to solving this problem. And at the moment, that is not true in Western societies. I'm afraid the problem in Western societies is a sort of selfish individualism.
And that's it from all of us here at First at 9. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.